thanks everyone for coming. I have the honor of introducing Professor Chalier. Catherine Chalier is professor at the University of Nanterre. She's a philosopher, particularly interested in Levinas and in the Jewish sources of Levinas's philosophy, but also in, for example, among others, Paul Ricoeur, and she will talk today about both philosophers, about Levinas and Ricoeur. She has translated, I think, several works of Levinas?
No, I have written several books on Levinas.
Yes, that I was going to say also. So yes, she has written...
But not translated,
no.
you write in French, so I don't have to translate.
So she has written several monographs on Levinas, among others, if I translate it in English, the titles Judaism and Authority and the Persistence of Evil. And so this is a sort of reach with the previous two lectures, who I think were more practical. This is, let us say, more philosophical, theoretical part of the lecture series. So I will hope that we will enjoy this as well. I now give the word to Professor Chalier.
So thank you very much. So I'm sorry I don't speak Dutch, so I will speak French, no, English, sorry, with a French accent, that's why. So here's what I am going to deal with, so you may follow. So both Levinas 1906, and he died in 1995, and Ricoeur 1913, and he died in 2005. So both of them were direct witnesses of the so many tragedies that occurred during the 20th century. Levinas was a witness of the Bolshevik Revolution and of the Shoah. He was born in Lithuania, that's why he was a witness of this revolution. And his parents and brothers were assassinated in Lithuania, and he was himself a prisoner of war in Germany as a French officer, but in a Jewish commander that has to work in a forest very hard for many years, till the end of the war. And Ricoeur's father was killed during the First World War, and he became an orphan, as his mother also died, and also a pacifist, a strong pacifist, till the Second World War. Both of them were contemporaries of the decolonization process and of the birth of the State of Israel and the wars between this state and the Arab states. Such a background, very briefly described, plays a key part in what they say about history in their different books. One of Ricoeur's first book, History and Truth, 1955, deals with the question of understanding history without giving up either to a systematic philosophical explanation of history or to irrationality and violence. And Levinas' main first book, Totality and Infinity, 1961, criticizes the Hegelian philosophy of history while arguing for a just judgment of history without waiting for its so-called achievement. So I take my first part now, the collapse of the philosophies of history in the 20th century. Both philosophers were not the first ones to criticize the philosophies of history. And the main philosophy of history, I don't know whether you know it or not, because you are not philosophers, if I understand well, is Hegel's philosophy. And after that, also Marx's philosophy. A philosophy of history tries to find a complete meaning of everything that happens, very briefly said. So, and the first philosopher that criticized this type of philosophy was Franz Rosenzweig, main book, The Star of Redemption, in 1921. It's a very important book. A book written after the terrible events of the First World War, while Rosenzweig was a soldier. And he started writing his book on postcard he was sending to his family. And this book, I'm not going to deal with this book because it will be another lecture, but this book was an important book both for Levinas and Ricoeur, and maybe especially for Levinas. First, criticism of the idea of progress. I deal very briefly because I can't go deep into the details. Hegel's philosophy of history, and if you want to know more about this, you should read, I don't know whether it's translated into your language, but La raison dans l'histoire, Reason in History, written by Hegel, and it's not so difficult to read, and then you will have an idea of what a big philosophy of history is. So I will say very briefly, and I'm sorry it's very brief about Hegel, but maybe in the discussion we'll go on. Hegel's philosophy of histories lays claim to be a universal history, and I know that historians don't like it very much. A universal history of the spirit leading to its realization in the concrete world. This is the main point. And from such a viewpoint, everything that happens, everything, a war, a revolution, disappearance of people from the scene of history, everything is a necessary moment in such a process. History is a universal process, the process of the realization of spirit, and everything is a necessary step in the process, even terrible things. From the viewpoint of reason, one must not be sorry for the wounds that are inflicted to the individual, since the personal aims must disappear within the universal one, the universal aim of history. So Hegel argues the realization of the spirit, meaning the realization of liberty. Evil in history doesn't oppose such a great aim, and we'll see that it's not the point of view of our two philosophers. Evil in history does not oppose such a great aim, since what we call evil, even a terrible war, what we call evil, according to Hegel, is useful to the achievement of history. One cannot do without it. Evil is a negative part that will surrender to a new and richer positive reality, and this is the dialectic that Hegel sees in history. Universal history is thus the progress of the idea of liberty, and it has to come over such so-called evils. So, it was very briefly explained. Now, in Totality and Infinity, and I would suggest you to read at least the preface of the book, which is very interesting. In Totality and Infinity, Levinas criticizes such an analysis, and he argues that the visage of being that shows itself in war is fixed in the concept of totality. And totality, Levinas is a strong opponent of totality, and according to him, history, such as Hegel sees it, is a totality, because everything is included, even terrible things, as I have explained. And he says, the visage of being that shows, it's a quotation, page 22 in the French edition, the visage of being that shows itself in war is fixed in the concept of totality which dominates Western philosophy. What does it mean? It means that individuals are reduced to being bearers of forces that command them unbeknown to themselves. The meaning of individuals, invisible outside of this totality, is derived from the totality. End of this quotation. So, history as a process and a progress toward freedom or peace is understood as totality by Levinas. In the name of this progress, individuals lose their identity since it is subordinated to the great meaning of this progress toward a so-called happy end. The suffering and death of individuals are seen as a necessary sacrifice, and Hegel uses the word sacrifice. So history is just like a divinity, and one must sacrifice to this divinity as a necessary sacrifice on the altar of history. Now, if Hegel's view on history might be seen as a theodicee, I suppose you know the word, theodicee, the progressive triumph of the spirit over human patience and narrow interest, we must understand that it is also the case of atheist progressivism. We can also understand a philosophy of history as a totality from a materialist point of view. It's not only a spiritual point of view on history. It is indeed confident of the efficacy of a good that is immanent in being and destined to visible triumph by the simple play of natural and historical laws of injustice, war, misery, and illness. Let's turn to Ricoeur on that point. It's a little different. He underlines the importance of progress, otherwise asking, when are we allowed to speak of progress? He answers that this is mainly in the field of tools and, broadly speaking, of technique and knowledge. And he quotes Pascal, the French philosopher Pascal, in Fragment du vide, d'un traité du vide. I don't know how you say that in Dutch, Fragment d'un traité du vide. Anyway, Pascal says the whole succession of mankind ought to be considered as one and the same man who continues to exist and learn. End of quotation of Pascal by Ricoeur. And the history of techniques and invention constitute one single history, which is the result of varying national and individual geniuses who come to be forgotten and merge with that history. The uniqueness of this history indeed appears more distinctly if we consider the fact that the personality of the inventor is obliterated by the invention at the time it becomes a part of common history. The very history of the discovery, the unparalleled drama with each invention meant to some individual, is, so to speak, bracketed so that the anonymous flow of human power and knowledge might be established. And Ricoeur concludes in this article, progress only means only concerns, an anonymous mind cut off from human life and the dynamics of man's achievements, torn from the concrete drama of suffering, striving individuals and the rise and fall of civilization. Are we ready to give a human significance to such an abstract and anonymous history, to such a faceless history? And both Ricoeur and Levinas share the same anguish about a faceless history in the name of progress. So I turn to B, the question of the meaning of history. According to Ricoeur, it's not enough to underline the importance of progress, since one has also to deal with what human beings do with techniques, arts and knowledge. Do they use them for their ruin or for their preservation? He argues that in each age our knowledge and our capabilities are at once a blessing and a curse. Such is what he calls the ambiguity of history. Ambiguity of history according to Ricoeur. History is not only a process towards a better future, it is also linked to human decisions, to dramas, and above all, so Ricoeur argues, to culpability, leading to destruction. History is ambiguous, according to Ricoeur, since in spite of the progress I have just mentioned before, it is also subdued by terrible human passions, such as pride, hatred, or fear. And these passions are at the core of the drama of history. So we have progress and drama. That's the ambiguity of history. I explain in the second part, of this paper, how Ricoeur believes it's possible, but I'm not sure you will agree with him, to overcome such an ambiguity when it is understood from the point of view of a Christian. We need Christian help. It's okay. It's okay. Moreover, in Time and Narrative, a book by Ricoeur, he explains that whereas Hegel's philosophy of history was grounded on the idea that Europe could totalize, and this is very important for Levinas also, when Hegel was writing, it was grounded on the idea that Europe could totalize the history of the world. Such an European centrism died during the 20th century. It's no more possible to think like that. Beginning with the suicide of Europe during the First World War, suicide, the ideological hostility between USSR and Western Europe, and of course with the decolonization and the unequal development between countries. And Hegel could not think about all these things. Such discrepancies prevent us from thinking that history has one meaning, as Hegel, but also Marx argued. We may be expecting better times, and we may be involved in different types of actions for the fulfillment of our dream of a friendly humanity, but in any case, it will not be a concrete reality in the near future. I turn to Levinas on this point, B. In his book, Difficult Freedom, Levinas reminds us that history is written from the point of view of the winners. Our Occidental history and our philosophy of history proclaim that we are achieving a humanistic idealism without taking into account the vanquished, the victims, and the persecuted ones, as though they had no importance. This Levinas says. Now, it is precisely because they do have importance that Levinas explains that we must not wait till the so-called end of history to begin judging what is now happening. If I say something bad is happening, but you'll see in the near future it will be good, that's not for Levinas. We must judge history now, without waiting till the so-called end of history. It's not, he says, it's not the last judgment that is decisive, but the judgment of all the instants in time when the living are judged. Totality and infinity also. Yet, in order that such a judgment should be possible, one has to take into account all the invisible offenses that inevitably result from the judgment of the visible history, and even when this history seems to be rational. Levinas, as well as Ricoeur, and for the same reasons, thinks there is not one meaning in history. Yet, in 1992, after the end of communism in USSR, Levinas argued that the disappearance of what had been a hopeful horizon, for many people at least, is of great importance. This disappearance is of great importance. Since the Bible, and in the mind of most Europeans, time had always had a reference to a promise of better relationships between people. And although USSR was a militant atheist country, it was also heir to such a promise. Something was being prepared in spite of all the errors and the obstacles. But now, says Levinas, with the collapse of the Soviet system, and even though it was also a positive event, our hope that history may promise us better times has disappeared. History does not have one meaning, and time does not promise us anything. And it's an article he wrote in the journal Le Monde, which is a very important paper in France, in 1992. See, evil in history. Both Levinas and Ricoeur are appalled by the gravity of evil in history. Levinas emphasizes the so many terrible tragedies in history that prevent us from thinking they are useful to any better future. I quote Levinas: racism, imperialism, and exploitation remain ruthless. Among the helpless and forlorn, the victims of injustice are everywhere, and always the most helpless and forlorn. And he also asks, who will say the loneliness of the victims who died in a world put in question by Hitler's triumphs, in which lies were not even necessary to evil, certain of its excellence? And in Time and Narrative, Ricoeur writes, facing so many victims and so much suffering, the dissociation which results between consolation and reconciliation has become intolerable to us. So we see that the two philosophers share a common anxiety in the face of the terrible events of their century. Ricoeur explains that for us who have crossed the monstrous events of the 20th century, tied to the phenomenon of totalitarianism, we have reasons not to accept, he quotes the word in German, the Sittlichkeit, it's the morality, the objective morality embodied in institution and so on. And to accept the Sittlichkeit, in which the spirit of a people is embodied according to Hegel. It's philosophy of Hegel. And he praised, and this is very interesting and important to understand, he praised the moral consciousness, on one hand, Sittlichkeit, which he criticizes, and on the other hand, the moral consciousness of a small number of individuals, inaccessible to fear and to corruption, where the spirit takes refuge once it has fled the now criminal institutions. And this is interesting because we have exactly the same move in Levinas' philosophy, from the objectivity of the institution to the consciousness of the individuals. And Levinas, who had personally to face extreme dangers, writes, but the fact exposed to the dangerous situation of its morality, residing entirely in its heart of hearts, its dignity completely at the mercy of a subjective voice. Subjective voice no longer reflected or confirmed by any objective order. That is the risk upon which the honor of humankind depends. And he was thinking, especially, but it's not only in France. The institution in France failed, but morality was no more dependent on an objective order, but it was dependent on a subjective, and only a subjective, voice. And this tragic conflict between moral consciousness and the spirit of a people, and spirit of a people, it's an expression you find in Hegel's philosophy. He thinks that they are a spirit of a people, but this conflict, tragic conflict between moral consciousness and the spirit of a people, or rather the disappearance of this spirit, may always remain unsurpassable. It's also as old, it's not new, it's not a new conflict, but it was a very tragic one in this century. It's also as old as the conflict between the prophets and the kings, or the priests and the people in the Bible. If you have a little knowledge of the Bible, the prophets were always the subjective voice, and they were criticizing both the kings, the priests, and the people. And according to Ricoeur, it reminds us of our prophetic vocation. There is no more any prophets, but we have a prophetic vocation. And he says, Ricoeur says, "Oh, my prophetic soul," meaning this subjective conscience. So I come to my second part. Has history become absurd? So, teleology versus eschatology. Teleology. Levinas contrasts the importance and the value of eschatology. I will explain what he means by this word, with the dangers of teleology, not theology, but teleology. Telos in Greek means a finality. Teleology means everything that happens leads to something else. It's telos, the finality of something. So, as I have already clarified, I hope at least, teleology means that every event that happens in history is a necessary step towards a better future. It may be a religious or a progressive teleology. It may be a theodicy, but it may be also a theodicy in a very broad sense of the word without any belief in God. But in either case, in the name of faith or in the name of reason, it is supposed to make us bear suffering. If there is a teleology, if all what that we suffer lead us somewhere, it helps us bearing it. Yet Levinas argues that in the 20th century, suffering has become so great and equals the two world wars, the totalitarianism of right and left, Hitlerism and Stalinism, Hiroshima, the Gulag, and the genocides of Auschwitz and Cambodia, and we could add other things now. I'm sorry to say, it's no more possible to think that it is subordinated in one way or another to a good finality, as the religious or the atheist advocates of teleology undertake to prove. And in Totality and Infinity, he stresses the importance of what he calls eschatology, which is, according to him, completely different. Eschatology, according to him, draws beings out of the jurisdiction of history and the future. It arouses them and calls them forth to their full responsibility. The eschatological judgment is not the teleological judgment, although eschatos means also the end, but it's a different way of understanding it. It's a judgment, eschatological judgment of history is a judgment in the present. In the present. It is the judgment of the present, and not of what is being prepared thanks to the terrible events and so on. And he says the eschatological vision breaks with the totality of wars and empires in which one doesn't speak. It institutes a relation with the infinity of being that exceeds the totality. What kind of relation? A moral one. And we find again the importance of morality. Levinas wants to proceed from the experience of totality back to a situation where totality breaks up. When does totality break up? It's the situation that of exteriority, of the encounter of the transcendence, which is, for Levinas, the face of the other. The encounter of the face of the other is the experience when totality breaks up. And he opposes a subjectivity born from this eschatological vision to the objectivisms of wars. Such a subjectivity is a responsible subjectivity, facing the other, facing his or her suffering. I am responsible. Without believing or trying to believe that the end of history, teleology, will reveal the secret signification of this suffering. It's never the case, since history is ready for judgment, according to Levinas, at every moment. I am responsible, meaning I must do everything I can to help my neighbor live. It would be immoral to justify his pain as though it was useful for history. The best signification history may acquire lies in this responsibility, in this non-indifference of one to another. Then, and only then, one may hope history will give way to a better future. Although he does not use such a philosophical vocabulary, Ricoeur shares the opposition between teleology and eschatology as explained by Levinas. Yet he wants to believe, and it's the word he uses, believe. He wants to believe that in spite of all the terrible historical tragedies, history does have one signification. And I'm not sure it's the case of Levinas. Such a signification is a hidden one, says Ricoeur. No one may argue he knows what it is, and even less act as though he was entitled to do so because of this so-called knowledge. One may only take risk about it, deciphering its ambiguous sign, we used the word ambiguity before, with different historical events. So, according to Ricoeur, it's because of revelation only that one, as a Christian, may believe history has indeed a signification. It's not because of any rational plan emerging from it, Hegel, or because of its progress in spite of all the tragedies and thanks to them too, Marx and others. I may recall here, I don't know whether you say that in Dutch, the famous and pitiless sentence, one can't do any omelette without breaking eggs. And sometimes, most of the time in history, the eggs are people. But the omelette, we don't see it. So, it's true that most of the time history is similar to an absurd, I quote Shakespeare, an absurd tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. You know that. It's in Macbeth, chapter 5, scene 5. But he knows that, Ricoeur. But according to him, there is another history. Yet even as a Christian, and Ricoeur is a Christian, Levinas is not, he's a Jewish, as a Christian, one may only believe, not knowing, may only believe and hope there is such a signification that will appear clearly at the end of time. Ricoeur explained that progress is what is rational within history, ambiguity is what is irrational, dramatic patience, pride, hatred, fear, that always prevail when people want to dominate other people, and also culpability. But for he or she who doesn't surrender to either of them, the significance of history is a meta-rational signification. For the Christian, it is an eschatological one, meaning one's life takes place within this temporality of progress and ambiguity, without the Christian being able to perceive this supra-rational signification, and without his being able to understand the link between the two histories, the one full of fury and the other one. This is, of course, a difficult thesis for a non-Christian. Enrique's conviction lies at the root of many theological problems. Beginning with the Church Fathers, Christianity conceived of itself as an unprecedented form of human community, defined by its members' inner conviction. Taking individuality, each believing Christian is a pilgrim in the world, awaiting reconciliation with God and the beyond. Taken collectively, however, the community of believers founded by the Messiah, Christian Messiah, has always achieved a measure of reconciliation within itself and thus is an agent of reconciliation in the world. The question is, and it's a question Mark Lilla asked in a book which might interest you, it's in English, The Stillborn God, Religion, Politics and the Modern West. Maybe you know about the book. So he asked how the reconciliation accomplished within Christendom compares eschatologically to the final redemption after the second coming, whether the Church reconciling ministry should be conceived in political terms, how it relates to temporal authority. These are permanent problems of Christian thinking, but so is the conviction that Christendom is called to reconcile the world. I'm not going to deal with this question, but I just asked them with Mark Lilla. So I turn to hope. That's for you, dedicated to you. So there are three kinds of hope: revolutionary hope, Jewish hope, and Christian hope. Revolutionary hope, I'll take, for example, maybe you know the name, Ernst Bloch, 1885, 1977. He was a Jewish philosopher and a communist. He was a non-orthodox Marxist philosopher. And he assumes that one who fights for a just, free and peaceful future is also fighting for what he calls the good. So when you fight for the good, you are entitled to do many things because it's for the good. And every terrible thing that occur in history, it's always for the good. The terrible good. Terrible good. This good is a possibility hidden in the objective process of reality, and the person who is on the revolutionary front of history, it's front of history, it's a word by Ernst Bloch, will not take into account the point of view of those who do not agree with them. More than that, since such a point of view, so the revolutionaries' view is hostile to hope, one has to fight against it in order to remain on the right side of history. It is, of course, an old story. Human beings have always tried to clear themselves of whatever violence they have been using while pretending acting for a better future. Nowadays it's also the case with different people and different the good. It's also typical of Western thoughts, explicit or implicit theodicy. Pains are subordinated to a finality, be it religious or materialistic, glimpsed by faith or belief in progress. That Levinas says is the grand idea necessary to the inner peace of souls in our distressed world. It's also the grand idea necessary for committing terrible acts without feeling any remorse of conscience. This is made clear by maybe someone we know, Czesław Miłosz. You have heard of him? He was a great Polish writer. He wrote also many poems and literature. He was awarded the Nobel Prize, if I'm not wrong.
Could you write his name, please?
Czesław Milosz. Milosz. And in his book, I read it in French, I don't know, it's La pensée captive. This is made clear by this Milosz attempt to argue that in the fight for the better future praised by Bloch, communism, but it might be something else, there is no room for pity, no room for moral consciousness. In fact, whenever science or rational objectivity is, and maybe we may say, or God, is a substitute for conscience, one feels entitled to commit terrible acts in the name of the future. One wants to do away with one's own doubts, and one refuses to testify now to the ideals one is fighting for. Yet, is it possible to hope for the fulfillment of a just and peaceful society if we do away with our conscience and take science or a so-called rational process of history as a substitute of our conscience? In the 20th century, so many terrible tragedies occurred in the name of the good that it is no longer possible to link hope and theodicy. Suffering and evil inflicted deliberately, but in a manner no reason set limits to, in the exasperation of reason, become political and detached from all ethics. Levinas said, concluding that the most revolutionary fact of this century is the end of theodicy. Jewish hope? If the better future one is fighting for remains without hope for the self, this is not a failure, according to Levinas. The future in which I will not be, and which my work anticipates, signifies the passage into the time of the other and the resurrection of the irreplaceable instant. The philosopher Levinas recalls that in 1941, a hole in history, a year when all the visible gods had abandoned us, where God was truly dead or had gone back to his irrevelation, Léon Blum, I'm sure you have heard of him, Léon Blum, who was in prison, a French political man, very important, was imprisoned at that time, finished a book for the generations to come, for a time in which it would no longer be. Levinas underlines the dimension of hope and nobility inherent in this project. I quote, "A man in prison continues to believe in an unrevealed future and invites us to work in the present, for the most distant things of which the present is an irrefutable denial. Yet, in order that hope may continue to promise us a world, even where confusion and misery predominate, it's not enough to fight for justice and peace. One must let this justice and this peace illuminate one's own psyche now, even in the dark times. The messianic hope is indeed a hope for this world, but it will never become concrete unless we start fighting against our own hatred, or simply our own desire to persevere in our own being without the other interfering in our so-called tranquility and happiness. Yet, we must not be content with a revolutionary hope if this hope only means fighting against another class, another people, and so on, without questioning our own desire to become powerful as soon as possible. Indeed, we know that when the highest hope and the highest power coincide, intolerance and violence also become greater and greater. Extreme violence coincides with extreme hope when this hope claims to totalize signification, be it a political or a religious signification. I will drop something because I must stop soon. So I come to Christian hope, not saying everything I wanted to say, and maybe I drop reconciliation, so we will have no reconciliation.
I willingly drop reconciliation.
So let's Christian hope. Ricoeur assumes that a Christian is one who is neither frightened nor desperate, facing the ambiguity and the peril of history. Don't be afraid is the biblical motto facing history. He also argues that despair and defeatism are the worst enemies of the Christian. He argues that a Christian has to believe that the terrible history we are living in has indeed a signification. This signification may not be deduced from what we see and experience or from our reasoning. It may be expected from a powerful divine grace. Meanwhile, Ricoeur says, the Christian should look for a signification within the ambiguity of history, and that is why, according to him, he may borrow some ideas from the philosophy of history so as to try to understand where history is leading us. As a Christian, one must not be satisfied with a single explanation of historical events. One has to multiply the points of view on them and not be fanatical. One must always complicate the problems rather than simplify them. He who believes in a hidden signification of history needs courage facing all the tragedies. He also needs to act with confidence and humility, not giving his assent to any system or to any fanaticism. On the other hand, his hope must always remain in touch with the dramatic and worrying aspect of history. One expects a secret and hidden signification of an apparent absurd history, otherwise this signification is but a philosophical abstraction. So I stop here because I was told not to speak more than 1 hour, and I have already spoken 1 hour. So
I think many people will be interested in hearing about reconciliation.
Yes.
So.
you want to be reconciled with yourself?
No, it's the general theme of this lecture series, so I think the reconciliation part would be...
So, but won't have time to discuss. Okay.
Well, we can stretch the discussion maybe 10 minutes more or something.
Okay.
You won't be
I'm
thrown
not
out.
in a hurry, but you are. Because of the strike, I must stay here. So reconciliation. Although Levinas's philosophy is not a philosophy of reconciliation, it's a philosophy that is looking for peace. Yet peace, according to him, does not mean an agreement between two ancient enemies. It occurs, peace, whenever the interim perspective of my responsibility for the other, without concern of reciprocity, this is very important, without concern of reciprocity. And this is a point where Ricoeur doesn't agree with that. But this is very important for me. Without concern of reciprocity. Maybe during the discussion I will give an example. Prevails over my desire to dominate the other. And in Totality and Infinity, he writes that peace is not to be tranquil and to be serene. peace is always full of anxiety, according to Levinas. It's not a tranquility, it has nothing to do with that. Peace is produced as an aptitude for speech, a personal speech, whose main word is, here I am. And when Levinas uses this expression, here I am, is translated into French, me voici, the biblical expression, ineni. Ineni in Hebrew means, here I am. And it's always the answer of the one who is called by God or and by somebody else, ineni. Taking a position in being and in history such that the other, and especially the victims of history, counts more than myself. Peace is independent of all appertenance to a system, irreducible to a totality, and refractory to a synthesis. An ethical peace, rather than a political peace, is an incessant awakening to the alterity of the other and to his uniqueness. The proximity of the neighbor, the peace of proximity, is the responsibility of the I for the other, the impossibility of leaving him or her alone before the mystery of death. And let's turn to Ricoeur. First, I recall that in Hegel's philosophy, reconciliation is a key concept. Any suffering contributing to the development of the human spirit in history is justified by the reconciliations it brings about. Yet, as we have seen, both Ricoeur and Levinas are well aware of the pointless mass sufferings of the 20th century. Neither of them agree to Hegel's view, according to which human beings are justified only through the process of reconciliation, which is assumed, so Hegel argues, to be rational. Now, as a Christian, Ricoeur thinks it's difficult to make justification dependent on such a reconciliation, meaning that any action would be justified as long as it is looked at as a necessary step in this reconciliation process. Yet, he doesn't want to give away the possibility of reconciliation. And in his big book, Memory, History, Oblivion, he underlines the importance of it while analyzing the gravity of forgiveness and oblivion in history, while stressing also the necessity of justice. And I'll quote, I will not analyze them, I'll quote 2 points only, because it's a very long demonstration. I quote only 2 points in this long demonstration to help people not to be imprisoned in their own suffering and in their own memory, not paying attention to the other people's suffering. And I have just said before that we must have different point of view on history. Following the track of critical history, memory becomes acquainted with the intelligence of justice. And Ricoeur adds that only an equitable memory, which is quite difficult to achieve, an equitable memory, may turn to be a happy memory too. And second point, which has been a polemical point when the book was published in France, I will tell why if you want, the necessity not to surrender completely to the task of recalling what has happened, to be involved with its worry, in order to be able to forget. Such an arts oblivionist, as he calls it, would deliver us of our worries and help us to achieve a reconciliation with life. So, forgiveness and art's oblivion, or art's oblivion. He concludes this book praising for an oblivion that would liberate us from worry, and he quotes Kierkegaard's teaching about the evangelical words, "Behold the falls of the hair, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you, that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Matthew chapter 6. Yet for sure, it's another kind of reconciliation which will not satisfy, I suppose, many people. So, at these 2 points we should be analyzed more deeply, of course.
So we have some time for questions now. Don't be shy. Let yourself go.
I wonder about case studies. Have you ever read or witnessed some case studies between?
Sorry?
I wonder about case studies in the city's scale. If say local governments or institutions engage with these two philosophy, to really construct the cultural memory.
What Rico says at the end about the reconciliation, I said many people criticize him about the arts of oblivion, especially because in France, and I suppose here also, but there are many many people who want not to forget. They don't want to forget. If we start forgetting, and if we start not to transmit what has happened, many people think that would be the worst. And so he speaks of the excess of memory. And I think from time to time we have to forget. But the question is, who is entitled to say, please forget this? Who is entitled to say that? I may be entitled for my own personal life, but even if you say to someone, forget, that won't happen. And he was criticized especially by the Jewish community, because the Jewish community wants to recall what happened during the Shoah in France, and there are many. Every year there are ceremonies and so on and so on, and so he was criticized, although he was saying stop with this. I'm not sure he was saying that, but it's really a problem. Who is entitled? I can't say to some, even on a personal level, I can't say, I don't know, I hope you have not suffered, but let us say you have suffered. Please forget your suffering. Who am I to tell you to forget your suffering? This is terrible. So there are things we are entitled to say to ourselves. That, yes, I can tell myself, try to forget, but I can't tell you, forget your suffering.
Now, from my angle, I say how we people in the festival management or art makers or creative social actors, how we can deal with this reconstruction of the memory, because today, okay, we say we shouldn't forget, because if not we can repress it and it can boom up like earthquake, or it can repeat again, like Valerie said. But how to do that? So how to approach it? So we really depended to philosophers and historians in that point.
I don't know how to do that, but I think what is important is to understand the plurality of memories and the plurality of narratives, and to understand that the narrative, for example, the narrative of the Jewish people in Israel is not the narrative of the Palestinian people in Palestine, and one has to deal with both, not with one. I'm not saying one is true and the other is false. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that one may take into account both of them, and it's true of every. It's just an example, but it's true everywhere. And when we are. Sometimes people have suffered so much. I understand. It's really difficult to be ready to listen to the narrative of the other. But I think this is very important, because otherwise, and there are people who are open to that, of course. But this is the only way to understand that the suffering of others. But while it's possible on individual levels, I'm sure it is, and I know people who are very open-minded on that level, but the problem is, on the political level, memories are, politicians use memories, and they are not ready to be open to different narrative, and they use one narrative, and they stick to it, and they want their people to stick to it, and so on. So I'm not saying to forget. I'm not saying that we must forget about our narrative. That would be as bad as. I'm not saying that. Of course not. But there is a plurality of narrative. There is a plurality of memories, and if we take another example, which is far away. The narrative of the Chinese people during the Second World War and the narrative of the Japanese, they are completely different also. So I'm not saying this is the true one and this is the false one, but as long as people don't listen, just listen at least to the narrative of the other one, and politicians use it. Both of them, Japanese and Chinese. There are many examples everywhere.
I have two related questions on things you said. One on that reconciliation, you said the problem is indeed or forgetfulness in name of reconciliation. So you ask when can you say, and in whose name can you make somebody forget? Now, of course, as you said yourself, Kerr clearly has an answer to that. He says, in the name of life. And it's not only reconciled for life, but with life. So my question is, life for a Christian clearly has this theological meaning. It becomes this master category, which is indeed a pragmatical category that we often see. People have to reconcile because life asks them. So life can be pragmatical realism in a political sense or a theological category. So isn't that the new good, and doesn't it have the same justificatory potential as good, the terrible good, as you said? Couldn't you say today the terrible life, which is even it's an even worse category in the sense that it asks you nothing, just to live on and to continue, and in name of that you have to reconcile, forget, and so on. Maybe that's what we're seeing in this post-political age, let's say. And then the question, the following, related to that is this idea of the loneliness of the victim. That's a very interesting one, and it is a category that we should take seriously, the idea that the victim suffers even more terribly because he feels extremely lonely because his story might be forgotten, this idea of... But then the question is whether the answer by Levinas and by Ricoeur, the idea of recognition of otherness or multi-perspectivity, plurality, and so on, is really an answer for victims. It's in the name of victims, but would they care for it? Because of course the loneliness of the victim is the loneliness that comes with, it's a longing for totality. It's a longing for not just being recognized in your otherness, not just your story next to many other stories, but it's your story as history. Not just as one memory, but as far as I see it, a story that matters for totality. So my question is that if we take serious that loneliness, whether plurality and many voices and so on is an answer. So politics of recognition, what is asked for to answer that loneliness, don't you need a certain totality, a certain notion? Truth, of course, is a category that comes from that notion of totality. We don't want any truth next to the others, we want the truth. And this thing should be recognized as history, not just one, one story beyond others, right? There's a difference between a story and history. So are we ready to leave this idea of totality? And yeah, that's my question.
I don't know. We
Of course, yeah.
Ready to drop the idea of totality, but I'm not sure that the loneliness of the victims longs only for totality.
Probably not only,
but it longs for recognition. It longs for words. It longs for people who say yes, and sometimes for people who say sorry. But it has happened. We can't change it. So we also have to deal with the encouragement of a new future. It's not possible to go back to the past. It's not possible. Reconciliation does not mean that what has happened hasn't happened. It has happened, and forever, it has happened forever. And I think that in some terrible conflicts nowadays, this idea is very important, because some people want the past not to have happened. It's impossible. It's impossible. So I would put an emphasis on the recognition of what has happened, recognition and words that name what had happened, yes, but also an encouragement to say now it has happened, but we must go on, and there is a rupture between the past and the present, and we have to begin something else. And reconciliation maybe is how to help people beginning something else, and not be only full of bitterness for the past that broke their life. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think it's very important. Otherwise, you won't start anything else, any life. You will stick. It's true in individual lives, but of course in collective life, and without a political recognition, an international recognition, it's even more difficult. But how to repair the past? How to repair the past? Unfortunately, we can't. We can't.
But if I can reformulate the question, if you have to reconcile with life, how to reconcile with those who clearly do not choose life and the present over the past? That is the basic.
How do I
Well, how do I reconcile? For example, if you say recognition, of course, we also suppose a certain we. Because I don't want just recognition by anyone, right? Or
Yes,
by
yes.
another. I want recognition by the other, right? And then the other question is, if you, for me that's the question, those who, if I have to recognize the otherness of an other, but that other defines him or herself on the basis of what he or she has suffered, then the question to forget is nothing less than giving up that otherness, right? In the name of life, which means basically the present. So there's another category of totality coming in that philosophy of history, right? The idea that the present presses you to live, and what is the present is that what asks you to, what is defined on the basis of life, which could be pragmatics, could be reconciliation, and so on. So that's for me the question. If they would only agree that that was past, then it was easy. If we would all agree what is present in political terms, in theological terms, in social terms, what is now, what is actuality, what has now to be answered. Because of course the question, for example, by Leon Bloom, to start a task and to work on it now in the present, that's the power to define what is now, what has to be done now, and so on. We're back to Lenin if we would agree on that. And so my question is, the pressing, the one who can define what is life and what it demands, and what the present is and what it demands, has the same power as those who had the philosophy of history in the name of the future earlier on.
But first of all, I will say that to choose life, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
And it's difficult for us. Every day we have to choose life, and even in small details of life, it's in the Bible. You choose life, Deuteronomy. It's the best verse of the Bible, I think. But it's very, very difficult. But you have to know when you choose life, and when you choose life, it means, and I suppose it can be also on a collective scale. To choose life is always to fight against what Ricoeur calls the ambiguity, or to fight against all the passions that are in yourself, in every one of us, and especially in people as a group. And we have to fight against it. And to choose life is also a fight, not against the other, but a fight against the other that is in yourself, the bad side of yourself. So it's a fight. It's not easy. It's not just let us live. It's very, very difficult. And so when we start understanding that when we fight against people, and if we don't fight against what in ourselves is also the dark spark, we won't achieve anything. So to choose life is very difficult, and it has not to be linked to any kind of ideology. I think it's linked to only one thing, creation, a creative life, on whatever scale it is, creation, and to bring something new, to start anew. This is to choose life, and we know when we do that. I think we know. And of course, on the collective scale, it's more difficult. But when I read Levinas and when I read also Ricoeur, although they are different, I think, and I have emphasized this point, they also say whenever, and Miloš also, which I quoted in the talk, they emphasize the necessity to go back to the subjective consciousness and not forget about it because of the objectivity of the institution, of the political choice, and so on and so on. I'm not I don't know if I answered your question. I'm answering your question, but
I'm really interested in the political force of this. If I would provoke you and say that because of this principle of life over everything else, is he a totalitarian thinker?
yes.
Would Ricoeur be a totalitarian thinker, or could you use him?
Totalitarian.
Yeah, this is a provocation, but because of this one concept of life, can't you use it in the very same totalitarian way as you can use the concept of the good? And you can think of a situation where there's such an evil in the world that sticking to life as the overall principle is an evil thing in itself.
Yes, I agree, but it depends what you understand by sticking to life. I am not speaking of sticking to life, I am speaking of choosing life, which is completely different. Of course, sticking to life, if I want to stick to my life and you want to do something bad to me, I will to stick to life always means I am the first. Okay, I want to persevere in my own being, as Levinas says. I want to persevere in my own being, and that's the first point. And wherever I want to persevere in my own being, the other comes second, because the first is my perseverance in my own being. Of course, I agree with you completely. Such a program is a very violent one, because this perseverance is the most important, and I want to defend myself. If you are aggressive, I will defend myself, and if I feel in danger, I will defend myself, and so on and so on. But when I say to choose life, it is something different. When I say to choose life, and I emphasize the word to begin anew, to create, and also to speak to the other, this choice is a choice in alliance with the other, not against the other. That is completely different. I understand your question, and I am happy you ask it, because to choose life is not at all to persevere in one's own life, whatever.
I'm not sure of that, because for me it can be, but I don't want to hijack the discussion, but maybe lost. If we, for example, take somebody who does not choose for life, philosophically seen, for example, you say, Adorno famously said after the Holocaust, writing poetry would be a scandal, right? I could say that is not choosing for life. Now you could say in the name of life, no, we won't let this group of victims hijack creativity. Poetry is standing for the creativity of all creativities, and we have to go on. That is what we often hear now. South Africa, you have to reconcile those of the ANC who want revenge, rancor. We're back to the discussion of Jean Améry, right? In the name of rancor. Right? Now let's take another example. We'll all agree that it's good that we write poetry again, right? But let's take the victims who said in Argentina, while the military dictatorship, that the football, the Mundial, shouldn't be going on, and that boycotted the World Cup of football there, right? You could say the same. That is the loneliness of the victim, and it's well described by those who were in the basements of, for example, shopping malls, hearing life going on, right? So they wanted to stop life. They would say that this is a state of exception, let us say, everything, nobody should enjoy anything until this is solved, right? And that is basically what we're dealing with here. Take, for example, that I would say as a victim in South Africa, until the reparations are paid, until there's a certain attempt at justice, which is of course another very problem, life should not continue. There's something to be said there. I mean, I would say that it's much more, I wouldn't get rid of the ambiguities of history. I think they are there for good, I mean, not for good reason, because that would be a dangerous reading, but I think we have to face them, and that is...
yes, I agree. I agree with the ambiguity, and all the examples you are quoting.
It's just, I'm just thinking of this. Okay, sorry.
Somebody else? Sika?
Well, I had one comment on the thing of life that maybe you can clarify for me, but I find it interesting because if I'm not mistaken, Ricoeur gets that from Nietzsche. So I find it really quite strange how he turns it into a Christian notion of life when Nietzsche's idea of, for example, when he talks about being critical, of using critical history and so on, that comes, and judging the past, that comes, and also advocating forgetting, he refers to Nietzsche. If maybe I'm mistaken, but I think that that's correct. And the other question I wanted to ask, which is quite apart from that, is, I mean, Ricoeur and Levinas both speak of recognition of the otherness of other narratives. But it strikes me that especially Ricoeur has a problem with multiculturalism. He's unable to account for that because what does it mean to recognize another person's narrative if the only way one can recognize it is by sublating it into an eschatological single narrative? I mean, that's not recognition of the difference of someone's narrative. That's the assimilation and appropriation, oftentimes. That can be a very aggressive action. Now, I understand that there might be a way to do that in a respectful way and so on, but that's where the sort of the nitty-gritty of the debate goes on. On what terms are we recognizing and so on? So perhaps you can clarify that.
But you were saying that Ricoeur does not. It's Ricoeur you are criticizing?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not sure about Ricoeur, but first of all, to recognize the different narrative is, first of all, to listen to these narratives, which is a great thing to listen, because most of the time people don't listen, they just speak. And when they listen for 1 minute, they are waiting for their turn to speak. And especially true in political debates, and so nobody is listening to the other, just so to recognize different narrative is to listen, and it also means that if I really listen to you, or try to, it means that I open myself. I am not imprisoned in myself with my group, with my people, with what I was told. It's an openness. It does not mean that I will agree with you, but I just listen. And I don't see neither Ricoeur nor Levinas saying that we must, after that, build a new totality with these different narratives or different way of thinking, because then they try, especially Levinas, to think how reconciliation can occur on a different level, and there are different Levinas and Ricoeur on that subject, and I think Levinas might be more profound when he says that I am responsible for the other on an asymmetrical level, not waiting for him or her to recognize myself. So if I wait for the other people to be ready to listen to my narrative, I must wait for a very long time. But if I start listening without asking him to listen to my narrative, it might be the first occurrence of hope in the relationship between people and individuals. And I think this asymmetrical way of looking at relationship between people is very important. It means that what I am trying to achieve for myself, not be stuck in my story, in my suffering, in my interest, and so on, and say, here I am, and really listen. That's a first opportunity for hope to occur in the present. So maybe it will lead to something, maybe not. And So, and I think it's more difficult for Ricoeur, because Ricoeur is always urging us to be reciprocal. So, and he criticizes Levinas, the way Levinas sees the relationship as an asymmetrical thing. And according to Levinas, when I say ineni see, it's not an alienation, it's an openness that leads us to a possible reconciliation and also to a responsibility. I am responsible for the other without waiting for him to be responsible for me. While Ricoeur wants the two to be symmetrical. Because if we wait for the other to be responsible for you as you are ready to be responsible for him, we may wait for a long, 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 long time. And this Ricoeur is on the symmetrical side and Levinas on the asymmetrical side. So what might be the conclusion from a political point of view? I don't know. I'm not really a politician. But I think that some experience in life, group experience, are experiencing this type of recognition without waiting for an answer. I will take one example I know. It's an example, it's an Arab, a Christian Arab who lives in Israel, an Arab Israeli, an Israeli Arab, and Per Shufani he's called. And he decided some years ago to travel to Auschwitz with an Arab community from Israel and with Jews from Israel also, but also from Paris. And the Jews were asking him, "What do you ask in return?" And he said, "Nothing. Just nothing. I just want the people to recognize your suffering. Now, if you want to do something, you do whatever you want, but I don't ask anything." So there are some possibility of doing things like that, and I think this is very important. And he succeeded, and so he was not asking for something in return. And it was a collective attitude, not only his. So, and there are many others, collective attitude like that might be little glimpses of hope in this dark world.
We have room for one more question.
But maybe at the political level, there are power relationships where we cannot say, well, we have the same responsibility and we have the same
Reciprocity.
Sorry. There you are. So we cannot put in the same level everything. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm speaking from maybe the victim's point of view, and I heard them to say, I will stick with this and with this fight, and I will not reconcile with them because they owe me something. I don't want to change anything. And my responsibility is for my families and my disappeared ones, that I owe them the truth. And that's my hope. That's my revolutionary hope. Not reconciliation, looking for justice. So,
and reconciliation
the state
must, I agree with you, reconciliation must not be at the price of justice. I completely agree. That's peace without justice is not peace. And that is not what Levinas is saying when he speaks of an ethical peace, and he opposes it to a political peace, which is we stop killing each other just because we can't anymore. So, and I agree with you. Justice is not separated from peace. I completely agree. But the question is how to achieve this justice. Is it in behaving like you say? I don't know. So, but I agree. And that's why forgiveness is not the good solution. But justice does not mean, once again, justice does not mean to kill the other because they killed my families. And justice also means to fight for a recognition of what happened, and we go back to the idea of this recognition. But can you oblige someone to recognize when he doesn't want to recognize?
Gina also says something very interesting that was also the subject of last week, that is the ghosts at the table, right? In the sense that reconciliation is so difficult because those reconciling often feel that they owe it to somebody else to bring justice, right? To a deceased father, relative, disappeared, and so on. So that's the difficulty of indeed giving.
And also very fresh, in fact.
Yeah.
Because in my case, I studied the traumas of Smyrna, so the great.
I did not understand.
In my case, I investigated the traumas of Smyrna.
What?
Smyrna, the city of Izmir in Turkey. So there are two traumas. One is Great Fire, very big fire, and the other is population exchange. And today they are really reflecting to the daily life discourse in both countries, Greece and Turkey. So when I compare my study with Gina, mine is much more kind of cold case. It's really happened 100 years ago. So what about to change the daily life discourse and how to use art and philosophy to change people approach to the place, to the space, to the city? But I think in the Gina's case, it's really very delicate because it's really fresh and people are still suffering, and it's not yet in the daily life discourse, in their as a culture, way of thinking, but there's much more emotions, really hot emotions. Am I wrong? I don't know.
I'm not sure about your case, but in the Ecuadorian case,
In the what case?
Ecuador, the violence, it was 30, almost 40 years ago, so it's not that fresh. And it was committed, most of the violence, or all the violence was committed by the state. So when you were talking about who should recognize, and they have to recognize, it depends, because I'm not talking about individual levels.
Yes,
in this case, it's an state who should recognize completely all these things, talking about justice and everything.
Yes, and I agree with you that the idea of reconciliation may be used by a state in a very perverse way, because we can, they may say we must reconcile without recognizing their own injustice, and that's true. So the concept of reconciliation is quite difficult, and it might be used in a very perverse way. This is true, and in the name of reconciliation, please let's start again, but without recognizing what has happened and the evil we have caused in the case. Yes, I agree.
Indeed, we have to stop here, right here. So, thank you all for coming. Thanks also, of course, to Professor Chalier.